When I was 13, we had this cat, Gustav. We'd had him since I was born. Father even joked sometimes that Gustav was my twin, as he'd been adopted just hours before the birth. 13 is the year I remember him clearest. Gustav was not a particularly playful nor cuddly companion. Often, he'd withdraw for days, sitting silently out on the balcony and eating only at the mercy of his expensive automatic feeder, which Father had bought as he was nearly always away. The feeder enabled Gustav to remain undetectable most of the time. I dare say that I'd sometimes forget Gustav even existed, only to be reminded of him offhandedly by the occasional meow when his food wasn't dispensed on time, or by a whiff of cat shit walking past the laundry room where his litter box was. I'd be reminded of him by one of these things or another, and I'd try to catch a glimpse of him through my bedroom window. The view there was of low-rise buildings mostly, sidewalks, people walking their dogs, and the swaths of empty field that began at the end of our street. But if I angled myself right, a section of the balcony, which Gustav was basically an extension of, became visible. He was always faced away from the window, standing so close to the ledge I sometimes thought he was about to dive off. His cataract eyes were wise and forever fixed on an invisible point in the distance, yearning. The year we'd turned 13, was when I first became convinced Gustav was about to die. He'd stopped eating. I noticed this maybe a few days later than I'd have liked to admit. Once the kibble overflowed his feeder and turned the kitchen air dense and salty. That he was ill was stupidly obvious. His eyes and inner ears were painted nuclear yellow. Gustav's liver was failing, and I was devastated. It wasn't just the idea of Gustav dying. He was already 13. It was the realization I neglected him for so long. That perhaps Gustav's unpleasant nature was a symptom of, and not an excuse for his neglect. Father took Gustav to the weekend, and I cried watching him. Lying out in his cage and on the balcony the night he returned. It felt as though forever had passed since I'd last given him my undivided attention. Maybe even since that photo of us was taken. In the crib, me, lying prone, with one hand holding a brake hand, and with the other pawing at his face. Where had the years gone? I longed to know only that white kitten of childhood, to forget the shadow lived before me, coat dust-colored, thinking of mildew. I turned 13, it was also the time I became obsessed with classical music. It was my remedy in those horrible weeks alone in the apartment, counting down the days to Friday, the summer break that seemed never to end. Night after night, I ate ketchup toast and potato chips alone, thinking of father, wondering if he was thinking of me too. Those days he came home, I tolerated the silence, knowing it would soon be broken by his jangling keys or heavy footsteps in the hall. But most days, it was too much to bear. I needed escape, I needed music, and so I had started taking these long walks through the dried up fields at the end of our street. The ground there was cement and glass mostly, browned grass, brittle kindling in the August heat. But I'd put on Beethoven or Brahms and watch it all come to life. Thorns turned to poppies, gravel to creeping lavender. In my mind, transfigured, a vast tableau of European pastoralia. I saw Mahler at the cabin at Steinbach. I saw the life I lusted after. It had to be shared, 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 meow. The refrigerator whinnied into silence. Without his nourishment, the walls seemed to bend in and cave around us. The lights flickered on and off and wailed. The sink began to leak. In all his absence, I never thought of my father as a negligent man. Each Saturday he vacuumed, changed the light bulbs, took out the trash, consistent as a machine. He refilled the envelope I was to use for groceries with the same 4 bills. He stood outside and had a smoke on the balcony when everything was done. It was all I could do not to beg him to stay when Sunday came. He'd step out the door and immediately I could feel the pipes rusting, the floorboards creaking, and guilt animating the wind that crept in through the open balcony. Haunted by my clear vision of Gustav and terrorized by shame, my immediate intuitive thought process told me that to redeem myself for the years of abandonment, all I had to do was hold Gustav forcibly on my lap and listen to the entirety of Beethoven's 6th Symphony. It was as though I had to show him true beauty, to make up for the many lost years and perhaps even liberate the kitten beneath the armor. But by the start of the second movement, I'd become distracted enough for him to recognize the opportunity for escape, and with a hiss and a cautionary protraction of the claws, he climbed down and out onto the balcony unresisted. At that point, the vet had said, Gustav was completely recovered, though to me it looked like the yellowing had only gotten darker, if more severe. And despite my best efforts, it seemed he was spending more time out on the balcony than ever before. By September, I was back in school, and things were largely as they'd always been. Gustav and I stayed in our lanes. Father came home on the weekends. It was one such weekend. He came home early, in fact. That father coffee smoking out on the balcony. shook the wall. If I was so intent on killing myself, he hissed, should at least be on my own dollar. He tore through the kitchen drawers in search of the grocery money and stuffed the 4 bills back into his wallet. I retaliated, screaming that perhaps he should be more concerned with the ends he himself had just pointed out, me killing myself, than the convenience, and that I hadn't bought the cigarettes with his money anyways, which was true. They were his. He marched out without a word more, and through sobs I listened to the car start and screech away against the hot pavement. That whole week, hungry and ashamed, I spooned mouthfuls of wet food from the stack of cans intended theoretically for Gustav. He, of course, never ate them, because the only food he ever ate was dry kibble, and only the feeder could dispense that. But who fed the feeder? I'd always assumed his father on the weekends. Another act of care evidences the gentleness I always knew he had inside of him, deep down. But the Saturday after the Friday when he stormed out, I woke to see that the feeder had somehow filled itself up completely overnight. And what was even stranger, it seemed to empty itself too. I'd go out to the balcony for a smoke, not once letting Gustav out of my sight, and come back to find less food in the bowl than before. I tested this observation by locking the balcony, and Gustav with it, one morning when I was leaving for school. With a plastic Sharpie, I marked the point on the feeder cylinder where the top of the food hits. And sure enough, when I came back, it dropped 4 or 5 centimeters below. And when I opened the balcony door to let him in, Gustav didn't come inside. He wasn't even hungry. It was at that point I realized that I hadn't seen Gustav anywhere other than the balcony since that afternoon we listened to Beethoven together. It was as though they were becoming one, Gustav and the balcony. He was a gargoyle, a permanent fixture in the concrete. His eyes and inner ears were now so deeply yellow, they looked almost brown. And his coat, that had once been kitten white, is now dark gray, like a smokestack. That night, I dream of the balcony, and it begins as it always does. I'm standing out there, and though I haven't checked, I know the door is locked from the inside. I'm no longer on the 3rd floor, but at the top of an infinitely tall building, looking out from the edge. All around me is the pure, blinding light, the silent abyss. I turn. The dread hits me stay here, knowing one of us must go. But my hands tremble, and I hesitate. I hurl Gustav off the edge. Tonight, dreaming, I stay and stare and peer out into the whiteness stretching into forever. Stalling, not wanting to turn around, not wanting to throw him off again, but I have to. Only when I do turn, I don't see Gustav. I see Father standing where Gustav normally sits. His face is contorted, ancient, feral. He gnaws and chews and spits. Suddenly beneath Gustav's bones. It's him deciding tonight. It's me. I throw myself off the edge into the white. The fields where I walked and listened to Beethoven were surrounded by a corrugated metal fence and could be entered only at 2 points. The small opening at the end of our street and through the cemetery that sat about 2 kilometers south. It was a perfect secluded spot which, aside from some older kids, would go there to get drunk on the weekends. I was the only consistent inhabitant of. Waking up that fateful morning, death rose. I made a promise. One final cast at redemption. I was going to be the one feeding Gustave, myself, by hand. And to give myself no other choice, I unplugged the feeder, dragged it down 3 flights of stairs and into a dry and littered corner of the fields, where it would sit, rotting silently for the remainder of my childhood. How much money must father have spent on it? How I let him down again. And of course, I couldn't even look, let alone feed Gustave. His fur was hardening in patches. His face was pressed deeply into the balcony, hard to tell where one ended and the other began. He was Polydectes. He was Han Solo in the Carbonite. And as much as Gustave fossilized, so did the balcony become a living thing. When I stepped out there to look, the floor was wet, spongy almost, smelling of mildew. And as much as Gustave haunted my waking, so did father terrorize my dreams and make impossible the retreat into sleep, where his words ran sharp as swords and filled my ears with blood. I'm sorry, but I worry about you. Again, unlocking the balcony door. Again, gagging. Again, stench. But these things happen, don't they? Bowls empty themselves. Bowls refill. That happens sometimes, doesn't it? 30 years down the line, back in the apartment, inheritance, renovations, maintenance men, when we forget to take care of ourselves. How they pried open the floorboards and cracked the plaster. They couldn't get him out. The stench, him rotting inside the walls that were him. Standing there again, staring, standing into forever. You, the good child. You, the other half, the feeder. Having done everything you can, he still won't eat. He won't eat.